Now we come to the portion of the service that we do before we do our Bible study. We talk about end times news and Bible prophecy, and this is update number 62. So it's cool to see each week it continues on. One of these weeks, this will be the last one because we're in glory. So we don't have to worry about these updates anymore. But again, these updates are keeping you informed, and we do want to welcome our online church and the subscribers around the world. Thank you for joining us and partnering with us. As we mentioned last week about the whole UN, and just before I talk about the UN agenda and all that took place, but just on the heels of that on Sunday night, there was a meeting that Obama had and some interesting statements that he made at this particular gathering. And part of this came out of a report of the Brett Bartlett website where Obama warns Christians that the gay rights are more important than religious freedom. And that's essentially the underlining theme of his particular talk. And again, as Pope Francis flew back to Rome, President Obama issued stirred warning to Christians, warning their attempts to assert their religious liberty to oppose gay rights would fail. And so again, he's saying that we affirm and cherish our religious freedom, are profoundly respectful of religious traditions. And then he goes on to say, but we're also have to say clearly that our religious freedom does not guarantee or grant freedom to deny fellow Americans their constitutional rights. During his speech, he also ridiculed Ben Carson. Again, earlier in that week, Ben Carson mentioned, there's no, a Muslim should not be a president of the United States because of their whole agenda with Sharia law and some of their agenda there. So, of course, he's going to attack Ben for making such a statement. But he also mentioned a couple other things about Senator Ted Cruz, who's also running for president. And if he was to get into office, he would make a ban on that same-sex marriage, so to repeal it, and most of the other Christian Republican candidates would do the same thing. He also mentions the same thing about Mike Huckabee. But Obama told the audience there that he would not back down on this efforts to make the progress for the LGBT community. He called for them to remain vigilant, hold the line on important legal gains in the country. So you can see his agenda is to continue to promote this whole abominable, immoral lifestyle. Now, going on to the UN General Assembly, we'll talk about the goals in just a moment. But they have a new president of the general or the UN. And he came into office on the 15th of September. And his name is Mogens. I think he's from Denmark, if I'm not mistaken. And but he promises that this will be one of the most critical years in UN history. It's also, again, the 70th year of its existence. And the agenda that he mentions, that it applies to every country in the world, that they recognize there's no such thing as rich countries over here and poor countries over there. We all share the same planet. So he has this whole global thinking, world thinking, and these goals that he represents as major breakthrough in global thinking about the kind of change that needs in the world. And he talks about the particular agenda. But he says that this is going to be the most transformative year. And so we heard that statement before back in 2008 when a certain man got elected president, and you saw how he transformed and declined and ruined a country. His name is President Obama. He says that we're going to fundamentally transform this country. This guy is going to have the same agenda. We're going to transform the world, that every country is going to adopt, and they are willingly signing this particular agenda, which leads to this global goals. Which is this particular report that kind of breaks it down a little bit more from the economic blog website. And this is that blueprint for the united world. So the UN had put these global goals, this universal agenda for humanity. Virtually every nation on the planet had willingly signed this new agenda, that you're expected to participate in it whether you like it or not. And here's what you have also seen is how certain politicians are now governing and prime ministers of some of the countries that we see here. They're the ones that are going to be implementing these things. So it's no mistake or coincidence that Turnbull is the new prime minister here, because he's all in line with this thing where the previous prime minister was not. So you see this whole jockeying that you see happening in different countries. They're going to have the right person to implement all these goals. And by the way, this is that giant step closer to the global governance. And so this is for all of humanity. So the question is, how, the big question looms is, how does an ambitious plan get implemented? Because you think it has to go through your House of Representatives and Congress and all those sort of things, but it doesn't. They've bypassed all that, where the state government leaders, the presidents and the prime ministers, they've bypassed that to implement these sort of things, and largely through secret trade deals, backroom, bureaucratic, rule-making decisions. And very few Congress members have even read this UN report. And you can download this report online, the agenda that they have there. But you're seeing such a promotion from these stars out there, musicians and movie stars and actors. They have the influence to persuade a culture. They're thinking, this is a good deal. We need this. We need to implement this. They had this huge festival that went on in New York City in Central Park called the Global Citizens Festival. So they had close to over 60,000 people in attendance there. And they're trying to promote this agenda. And again, just before they're taking place, the Pope spoke at the UN. And the thing, in the whole meetings of the Pope, he never once mentioned the gospel. When you got billions of people watching your messages, not once did he mention God, not once besides God bless America. That's the only time he mentioned God. He never mentioned the Bible. He never mentioned Jesus Christ. He never mentioned the gospel. Imagine if the Apostle Paul got up there and preached the gospel, right? Not backing down. But not the Pope, of course. He's the one that kicked off this whole agenda and supporting it. And, of course, the diplomats around the world stood and applauded this whole agenda, which is going to cost between $3 to $5 trillion a year up until 2030. Where's this trillions of dollars coming from? Not from the poor countries, my friends. They're going to come from other countries, so they're going to be raising more taxes at some point. But you see, and again, on the surface, these goals sound great. Who wouldn't want to end poverty? Who wouldn't want to end hunger, right? But it's the things that are not being flat out spoken. Read between the lines, the language that's being said. And so these goals, again, to end poverty in all its forms, that's the first goal. How do they do that? Centralized banking, the control of the federal finances, a cashless society, distribution of wealth, socialism. It's going to happen. We're starting to see all these agendas taking place. Ensure healthy lives, promote well-being of all ages. Mass vaccinations, it's required. You see what happens, especially in the westernized world with a lot of the kids, not all of them, but a lot of them, you see the rate of autism going through the roof after they get these shots that happen. And there's all kinds of other diseases and the flu shots and stuff like this. And you can see the kids were fine before the shot. After the shot, you started to see something weird took place. And you see more in the westernized worlds where you're required to have these vaccinations. Now, I'm not saying that's all the case, but you're seeing a huge number of cases coming up because of this vaccination. It's the whole control, the education and promote lifelong learning opportunities. Another word for it, propaganda, brainwashing that's happening in the schools, starting from kindergarten or prep all the way through university. The whole agenda to accept the tolerance and homosexual agenda, Islam. The other issue, I don't know how they're going to get this in some of the Islamic countries, but gender equality, empower all women and girls. How's that going to happen in the Islamic countries? Women are not equal to men. They're slaves. They're not free. They don't have a voice. They can't do what men want to do or, equal pay and all this other stuff. This is not going to take place in Islamic countries. So something has to happen. And there's so many other lists that go on where you can even, like, for example, even promote peaceful, inclusive society, sustainable development, providing access to justice for all, building effective, accountable, inclusive institutions for all. The UN peacekeeping. One of the things that you saw during the J.D. Helm over the last several months in the United States is hundreds and thousands of UN vehicles coming in there. You're going to see more of these in other countries, these UN coming in to take over the peacekeeping missions, the international courts, blind so-called justice, forcing people together, even through these fake refugee crisis that's being developed. Some are real and most of them are not refugees. Part of it's the whole Islamic invasion that's developing. So again, the whole elite wants this one world government, one world economic system, one world religion. And they're not going to achieve these things by conquest, but rather everyone's going to sign up to these things willingly because all these people, because all the rhetoric, it sounds so good. Who wouldn't want to go through this? Anyways, Benjamin Netanyahu, in his speech on Thursday at the UN, very powerful speech, mocked like never before or any other speech that he ever gave on the internet. But where he mentions again through, in a nutshell, how Israel is such an isolated nation. The world is against her, and you see this as really fulfillment of Zechariah 12, the world against them. But he's also mentioned in that particular talk about he's ready to resume peace talks with the Palestinian Authority without preconditions. But unfortunately, Abbas, who the Palestinian president the day before, is not prepared to do this. Benjamin Netanyahu hope he changes his mind because he's committed to a vision of a two-state for two peoples, which a demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state. That's not going to happen because the Palestinians, Iran, and most of the Islamic countries do not recognize Israel as a state. And so he also mentions that UN should rid itself of the obsessive bashing of Israel. But it's not going to happen. We're going to see more of this rhetoric, the hatred for evil taking place. And just how they even rank Israel. In fact, the Egyptians rank Israel as the most hostile country. The Egyptian people ranked Israel as the most hostile country according to their public research. And then they put the U.S. number 2, Iran 3rd. Saudi Arabia ranks as the most friendly nation in the Gulf states. Interesting. Speaking of the Middle East, again, pay attention to continue what's happening in Syria. The buildup and also the operation that Russia's been doing now. We've talked about how they're building their military in there, their air support. They're now just operating miles just from the northern mountains of Israel. And their goal, again, is to eventually take over. They're wanting to expand its borders and influence. They specifically want to replace the United States as the dominant military force in the Near East, and it's been kind of a firm bipartisan U.S. foreign policy since World War II, keeping the Russian military out of the Middle East. But yet President Obama is surrendering the region to Russia with breathtaking speed and foolish policies that he's made. And Putin is not alone in making these moves, as you know. He's working hand in hand with the Iranian government. They're supplying a lot of the missiles as well as in Hezbollah and Hamas. So again, the whole Ezekiel 38-39 potential war could be developed. You see all these pieces of the puzzle are lining up. And then lastly, as we see, there's going to be more of an increase of violence, wickedness, and Satanism. In fact, even a report came out last year about the rise of Satanism. But we saw the violence on Thursday about this Oregon gunman that tells Christians that they're going to see God in 1 second. So he goes on to this college campus in this small town in Oregon and opens fire in a classroom. But before he does that, he asks, "Who's a Christian? Stand up." And then he fires and shoots them. So you don't hear this about other religions. Hey, if you're a Muslim or if you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or if you're a New Ager, let me shoot you. But they go after the Christians. And again, as we mentioned, the rise of Satanism. You see these festivals popping up all over the place, from New Age stuff to Satanism, the Psychic Expo that's going on right now here today in Melbourne. But you see there's a big festival that was taking place just this last week after the Pope left New York City. They had this particular festival, and they're getting all these people chanting, and this whole festival taking place of Satanism and witches and things like that. And it kind of reminded me, as they're chanting all these things, in Acts chapter 19, verse 28, when the town was chanting, great is Diana of Ephesians, right? And the next verse says that the whole city was filled with confusion, because Satan is the author of confusion. And that's what happens with so many people. They're confused with all this. So you see the witches, you see Hollywood, you see the TV, you see the movies, the education system, the homosexual agenda, the Islamic agenda. The violence is on the rise. It's going to get worse and worse. It's not going to get better, no matter how much tolerance you want to promote in the workplace or in the schools. Israel's going to be hated amongst the nations. There's going to be that attack against Christianity, mocking the Bible. And as Christians, we need to be watchful. We need to be on alert. We need to be putting on the full armor of God each day, as Ephesians 6 talks about. We need to be praying for one another, encouraging one another. Those that are going in the front lines in persecution, being shot for their faith. What an opportunity for the gospel to be preached at the funerals. We need to be praying for these family members, praying that the gospel would reach these people. And my encouragement for each and every one of us is to live each day to the fullest for the glory of God, and that we would live a life that is pleasing to the Lord until He comes back, or until we go to be with Him. Amen? And that concludes today's update.